经过上午场的介绍，一个比较整体的介绍，还有下午的对话，从现在开始，我们进入这次主题的核心，场域为主的学习。那我们再欢迎 Alan。
To move on to the topic of place-based education or place-based learning for really the remainder of this weekend workshop. So today, this afternoon, I'm just going to get started. I want to spend the rest of our time here setting the stage for place-based learning and talking about place and what it is to the human being. And also just some of the origins of this type of learning that we call place-based education and place-based learning. Implicit in so much of Montessori's work is the importance of place. Even though she never used the term place-based learning, she spoke of place so much. By advocating for the farm as an ideal location for adolescents, she was talking about the importance of place in deciding how you are going to educate young people. And talking about the prepared environment so much in her work. The prepared environment is one of the most important concepts in Montessori's version of education. She was talking about place and the effect that place has on learning and on educational experiences. She understood that humans are in a constant dialogue and interaction with the space around us. The space that we are in can affect our emotions. It can affect us psychologically, mentally, physically. We experience the world through our senses, and the place that we are in feeds our senses. And so it informs how we are experiencing the world around us at any given moment in time. We just don't usually think about it. We don't usually think about how is this place affecting my mental state right now. Place-based learning, otherwise known, another name for it is pedagogy of place. These are terms that have been made public in recent decades by a couple of gentlemen, namely David Orr and David Hutchinson. Those are two Americans who are advocates of this type of learning, and they have written about it quite extensively. David Orr is an environmentalist, and he practices eco-criticism, which is a form of literary criticism that focuses on the places that authors write about and how it affects the novel and how it affects the reader's interpretation of the work. But he has written extensively on that, and so has David Hutchinson. So I will be drawing on their work a little bit as we talk about place-based learning. You'll be seeing their names or hearing their names once in a while. It was also the focus of John Dewey, who was a contemporary of Maria Montessori, who, like Maria Montessori, never used the term place-based learning or pedagogy of place, but he wrote a lot about the importance of place in education. I put this quote on here just as an example of that, where he wrote, experience outside of the school has this geographical aspect. It's artistic and it's literary, it's scientific and it's historical sides. All studies arise from aspects of the one earth and the one life lived upon it. He was talking about, in this passage, he's talking about the importance of getting out of the classroom, and he was trying to encourage teachers to find ways to get students outside of the classroom where they can be in places and in spaces that would inspire geography and art and literature and science and history. It sounds a lot like what Maria Montessori was saying when she said, therefore, work on the land is an introduction both to nature and to civilization, and gives a limitless field for scientific and historic studies. These two educational theorists, way back in the late 1800s and early 1900s, urged educators to take place into consideration. And both of them laid the foundations for us, even here today in the future, to really take this into consideration and explore the possibilities that a focus on place can give us as educators. So we're going to be talking about this today and tomorrow. Montessorians, I really think that Montessorians need to really focus on place. It's part of our work in trying to design the best prepared environment, for one thing, but it's something that we need to explore in terms of just exploring what these theorists, like Montessori and Dewey, were trying to tell us about the power of this concept. That's what we're going to be looking at. As we do this, I've kind of outlined our exploration of place-based education in this way, so we're going to be talking about these topics moving forward. I want to talk to you today about the role of place in the human psyche to set the stage for all of this. The role of place throughout the planes of development. Defining what place even is when we talk about place. Connections it has to Montessori philosophy. Merging place and education. We're going to talk about essential characteristics of place-based learning experiences. And then tomorrow I'll also be talking about frameworks for developing place-based learning experiences. And that's where we'll just get into some practical ways that you can actually incorporate this into a typical school day. And then of course there is some independent work involved in an activity called the Site Safari that we'll be doing over the next couple of days as well. This will give you a chance to not just sit here and listen to me talking about place, but to actually do a little bit of investigation of your own and do something that you can take back with you to wherever you go from here. So this is a topic near and dear to my heart. It's a topic that when I learned about it, as I was in training, it just made sense to me. I internalized it very easily. It just made total and complete sense. And so I'm excited to talk to you about it. I'm going to start with the role of place in the human psyche. Place is and always has been deeply embedded in the human psyche. We can search our collective knowledge of the entirety of human history and find that place and environment has always held a prominent, if not starring, role in the human story. And we don't need to look much further than cultures around us in the world. The Inuit of the Arctic, the San of the Kalahari Desert, the Aboriginal people of Australia. Place is deeply embedded in their cultural identities. It is a part of who they are. They have based their entire culture around a response to the place that they live in, that they work in, that they gather. And for millennia, humans have gathered around fires, around tables, in taverns, to share with one another in communities, to forge that sense of place that becomes part of their cultural identities together. And we have physical, tangible evidence of this in many of the monuments and artifacts from human history. We have tangible evidence of just how important and deeply embedded place is in the human psyche. We can go all the way back before the development of agriculture, before the development of the written language, when, as far as we can tell, most humans traveled in family groups, and they were hunters and gatherers. They lived nomadic lifestyles. You would think that even back at that point in time in prehistory, that place would not matter so much to people who were constantly on the move, constantly spending every waking moment simply looking for food and trying to stay alive. But artifacts tell us differently. Artifacts tell us that even our prehistoric human ancestors around the world found place to be very important. One such place are the caves of Lascaux, France. We're looking at a video reproduction of traveling through these caves. It's a little bit dark. But as you look, you can see on the cave ceilings and the cave walls in certain areas that there are some animals, different images, even some geometric designs, dots and lines, painted onto the walls and ceilings of this cave system. This cave system was discovered in 1940 by a couple of teenage boys and their dog named Robot. They were traveling through a field in France, stumbled upon a hole in the ground, decided to go into that hole to see what was there, realized it's this elaborate cave system. So they went and got some adults, and excavations began. And what they discovered was really quite astounding. The tunnel after tunnel full of paintings. Even a room like you see here, that we call this the Sistine Chapel of cave paintings. A huge cavern, just completely painted over with animals and different symbols and dots that we haven't quite figured out what those mean yet. But what's extraordinary, what they have realized recently in this cave system, is that these paintings, as they have done testing on the pigments within these paintings, they have discovered that they were made over a course of 15,000 years. So paintings of animals were painted on top of other paintings of animals that were painted on top of others over the course of 15,000 years. People, during a time when human life consisted of living nomadically and just trying to survive day after day, came back to this place over and over and over again and took the time to paint on the walls. It was too dark to paint on the walls. They even developed little lamps. They carved into stone, carved little grooves and put animal fat into little grooves of stone. And that animal fat check. There it is. We're back. That animal fat could burn for up to 24 hours, providing just a little bit of light in there to paint. But it's really extraordinary to consider that. Should I change my pronouns? Yeah. Might be the better one. Hello. All right, we're back again. But it's extraordinary to consider that this place was so special to these people. We don't know why. We don't know yet what made this place so special. We only have theories. It's still special to us today because we knew it was so special to people so long ago. The reason why there was a video recreation that you were looking at is because today the cave system is being attacked by black mold, a very dangerous mold that is toxic for humans to breathe. And so nobody's allowed in it except for scientists who are able to go in for very limited amounts of time. They're trying to figure out how to get rid of the black mold without getting rid of the paint. But they're trying their best to preserve this because it's a historic artifact of our story, of the human story. And it's a place that obviously our prehistoric ancestors held very dear for some reason, and they would return to it over and over again for 15,000 years. And it wasn't just in Lascaux, France, where they did this. Cave paintings exist all over the world that seem to indicate that people on every continent in prehistory would find these places and go in them and take the time to make elaborate paintings, images, trying to make sense of the world around them, it seems like, trying to make sense of these animals that they were hunting and what is life all about. They started to turn it into artwork and probably an early predecessor of language, just trying to figure out how to create an image that might express my idea or my feeling. And they would go back to these places over and over and over again. This is in Dordogne, France, what you're looking at here. And we see a spotted horse over here that was very carefully painted. The stomach here, you can almost tell on the slide, it's got a lot of ridges and lines. That's because they just took their fingers and tried to create fur. The spots and much of the rest of the animal was created by a very primitive form of spray painting, where they would chew up the pigment in their mouth and then blow it onto the wall out of their mouth. And they came back and they did this over and over again. But one thing that's really interesting in this image that you might notice are handprints. Like this handprint here and this handprint down here. They would put their hand on the wall and blow that pigment out of their mouth so that the paint only went around the outline of their hand, leaving a handprint. It's as if they were trying to say, I was here. This place is special to me, and I want it to be a piece of who I am. I'm going to leave a piece of me right here. And so they would make their mark, make their signature. What's extraordinary about this is that it's not just in this cave in France that our prehistoric ancestors were doing this. This is in Indonesia, around the same time. Argentina, a lot of hands. All over the world, just a few examples. People saying this place is special and it is a part of me. And so I'm going to leave my mark here. And these were created by nomadic foraging family groups. Not by people living in these caves. Possibly not even by people that lived in this area their whole lives. They were moving constantly. So as people begin to settle after this point, when we come out of prehistory, we get to a point where people start to figure out how to grow food out of the ground and how to domesticate animals. And that discovery leads people to settle down and to stop being nomadic, to stop foraging for food all the time. They settle down, family groups start to get together to form little villages where they start to figure out how to network and how to work together to have the best lives possible for them and their families. And of course, these villages started to grow and turn into cities. As all of this is happening in the human story, something really important happens. People realize that they don't just have the ability to find important places that already exist in nature, like caves, they can actually create and design spaces to be important and meaningful places that they can go to. This is what Dr. Montessori referred to as supernature. The ability of humans to take the natural world and to create a new nature, to construct using materials out of the natural world. This came along with cities. And this happened all throughout the world. Here's one example of the power to design space, to create a place, not just choose one that already exists. This is a ziggurat in ancient Iraq. Ziggurat is a term that means mountain. The people of this area in the ancient world that began to develop cities along the banks of the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, they developed a belief that it was on mountaintops that gods and humans could communicate with one another. That humans needed to ascend mountaintops to speak and communicate with the divine. But in this part of ancient Iraq, they didn't have any natural mountains. It's fairly flat. So the people of this area, the people of ancient Sumer, decided to build mountains, brick by brick, forming millions of bricks with their hands out of clay, and stacking them up to create these man-made mountains that they could ascend to go and communicate with their gods. They designed an important place for them, a place that had meaning, a place that had social context. A little bit later, in ancient Greece, the philosopher Aristotle, he talked about topos, a word describing feelings of belonging that are evoked by the relationship between a person and a physical environment. Philosophers of the ancient world took notice of how important places could be in the human experience and in the human psyche. And so they started to explore the idea. They would talk about it, they would write about it. What is it about this relationship we have with our surroundings, with our environment? It affects us. It can change us. It's important. A little bit later, Roman philosophers, in the same way, started to talk about this concept of genius loci, meaning the spirit of place. They would talk about this mysterious and elusive spirit that could exist within a place, that people could feel, and that people could know is there, even if we don't know how to describe it. There's still something that we can feel. There's a spirit about it. In the Middle Ages, the work continues of really mastering the design of places that are significant to people. I'll just share this example of Gothic cathedrals around Europe. They're a wonderful example of how space can be intentionally designed to evoke a certain response from people in that space, specifically designed to give meaning, to affect the emotional mindset of people in it. These are a wonderful example of this. These cathedrals scattered all over Europe, built in the 1100s, the 1200s, the 1300s, are quite extraordinary when it comes to the Christian faith and trying to help a Christian person experience their belief system in a new, a tangible way. That's what these were designed to do. These were designed to help a person who was a Christian feel their Christian beliefs. Not just believe them, not just know them, but feel them. So with these cathedrals, what the architects did was they designed them so that when you enter through the entranceway, you walk in, And everything, this is hard to capture in photographs, but everything in the interior of the building is directing your attention upward. You want to look up immediately when you walk inside of this building. Part of that comes through the fact that the arches, all of the arches that you see, are pointed. They're actually pointed as if arrows pointing your direction up. Part of it is that you realize that there's this soaring height between your head and the vault above. It makes you want to look at that space, that open space up there. So your attention turns upward. And as you're looking upward, you notice in one of these places that light from outside is filtering in through stained glass windows, casting this colored light onto the cold gray limestone and marble that these are constructed out of, seemingly disintegrating the structure of the building itself as if it is melting in color. As if you were looking up into something more spiritual. It's meant to make a follower of this religion walk in and immediately feel like they have just entered a new type of place, a spiritual place, that they have left the earth, and they are now in a place where they can communicate with God. Even the movement of a person in one of these places is very carefully directed and designed. These cathedrals were designed in the shape of a cross, and everything about them is symbolic. The main entrance is always facing the west, which is facing the setting sun, which was symbolic of death. So humans would enter through that door of death, sin and death, separation from God. But they would enter, look up, and realize that they were in a new place, a place of redemption. The most important part of the building, the altar, where they would keep relics of different Christian saints who had died, was always facing the east, facing the rising sun, a symbol of life. And so your task going through a cathedral as a Christian is to progress from death to new life, from west to east. If you are a person visiting a cathedral like this, they even have these little stations on the side throughout the cathedral building that contain other important relics. And so people go in and they actually walk the shape of a cross throughout the entire thing. And then they exit. And everything in the interior is propelling you to do this. All of the lines that are very specifically designed by the architects are rhythmic. You walk into a cathedral and it's the rhythm of the columns and the lines and the arches that are helping encourage you to continue moving forward while looking up, trying to leave this earth into a more spiritual realm. Very carefully designed. Even the floors of these cathedrals, oftentimes labyrinths, were designed into the pavements of the floor. So the faithful will come and they will slowly and quietly walk the labyrinth. Sometimes crawl on their knees on the labyrinth until they reach the center. It's intentionally designed space that is meant to have meaning and is meant to influence the experience that people have with it. And many examples from our modern day can be given that show just how often we attribute meaning and feeling and memory to specific constructed, prepared places. I can't help but think of the silence that falls on our adolescents when we go to New York City and we visit the site of the World Trade Center, and we visit the memorial that was built to honor all of the victims of that terrorist attack. They weren't alive when that happened. They don't have that context to understand what it felt like to be an American on that day. But we take them to this spot in New York City, and it is so well designed. The holes of the buildings are still there, surrounded by a wall with names engraved into it. Not in alphabetical order, but in order of how people worked together in the buildings. Looking out over a pool of water that in the center falls into a void where you can't see where that water goes. But the water is reflecting the sky above it and anything over it. And these young people just walk up to that and they look in that hole, that empty hole, and they just fall dead silent. There's something there that they can feel that helps them to understand that moment in history and what it did. And it's specifically designed to do that. It's a powerful, powerful place. It affects their mindset, it affects their emotions. They learn from it. With no words, they learn from it. Similarly, I showed this in a slide earlier, not this particular picture, but here we have Maya England's Vietnam War Memorial in Washington, D.C. again, another place where our students go when they're studying war and peace, and they walk up to this shiny black granite wall representing the Vietnam War. They, of course, were not alive during the war. They don't have any personal context to understanding that war and what it meant to people who were actually in it or affected by it. But they walk up to this wall and they see names engraved in it. But the wall has a mirror-like surface, and they suddenly notice their reflection in that wall. And they see the names of the dead within their own reflection. That is powerful. That is powerful, purposeful design meant to change a person. Meant to teach them without even words. That's the power of place. That's why the prepared environment is so important. That's why place is so important. If you learn all that there is to learn from place, you almost don't even need textbooks anymore. You just need to know where to go. You just need to know how to make the right environment. We feed off of it. We respond to our surroundings. Just one more example. Times Square. Slightly happier example. When we take our students to New York City, they almost seem to not care about anywhere that we want to take them. They just want to be in Times Square. Has anybody been to Times Square? What was your experience of it?
Exciting.
Exciting. Yep. Exciting.
Well, energy is flowing everywhere.
Right? Energy flowing everywhere in Times Square. I am convinced that they love Times Square so much because it is a physical manifestation of the adolescent brain. It is nothing but energy and movement and excitement, and things are flashing everywhere. You can't focus on one single thing for more than 3 seconds. And that is a middle schooler. And it's all over the place. And it's crowded. And it's noisy. And they love it. But even that is a powerful example of how place can affect our mindset and the way that we feel and the way that we respond to where we're at, even Times Square. It's much different than if you're in a library, right? It's much different than if you're standing in front of the World Trade Center 9/11 Memorial. Much different. Place is important. So place helps to shape our individual and our cultural identities because we respond so deeply to it. Place is important because it creates a bridge between past and present. As is the case for the war memorials that we take students to. It creates that mental, psychological bridge where they're able to connect with the past. That makes this place incredibly important if you're teaching history. And it provides context for meaningful connections with one another. I think that is another important thing to say about place and place-based learning is that there are so many times where a place that we go with our students, it brings so much out of them because of what they're experiencing and how they're responding to place. They start to respond and interact with one another differently. And it creates these meaningful connections to each other and to the other people of that place. So it is no wonder that adolescents are so affected by place and why it is so deeply connected to the human psyche. And that is because it plays such an important role in human development. Dr. Montessori spoke of an inner guiding force within the developing human that impels them toward activities that support their natural development, that activate or refine the individual at each age, in each plane of development. That there's this inner force, this drive toward the activities that we need to do developmentally at that age. These developmental tasks are often related to how the developing child experiences the environment around them or their effect on the environment around them. And in that way, place is a key contributor, not just to isolated experiences that we have with place, but it contributes to human development as a whole. We develop partially through how we respond to place. In the first plane of development, the early years, the infant years, shortly after birth, the infant has emerged from the womb and into the world. The mind begins to absorb all that is around it through the senses. In the first plane, the child is what is referred to as a sensorial explorer. We all have a natural tendency to explore. That never goes away. It's a human tendency that exists within all of us our whole lives, to explore what's around us. In the first plane of development, that exploration is all about the senses and absorbing all that can be absorbed in the world around you through those senses. Developmental psychologists largely agree that newborn infants do not recognize themselves as distinct and separate from their surroundings, which means they have no real sense of place yet when they're an infant, except for their own selves. They don't see themselves yet or understand themselves as being unique and separate from anything else around them. An infant's sense of place then is largely wrapped up in sensorial exploration of their own body, which is why they're sticking fingers and toes in their mouths. and exploring their own body and what's immediately in front of them. Even internally, they have this sense of place developing through what they're feeling. Their digestive system is still developing. The skeleton is still forming within them. Their place is themselves. As the first plane child grows, they eventually learn to move on their own through crawling, and then walking, and then running. Gradually in this way, as they get older, exploration becomes less about their own self and more about their own self within an environment that contains materials and people. In the first plane, they gradually go from exploring from place being their self only to starting to understand themselves as something unique and separate from everyone around them and everything around them. They continue to be sensorial explorers, but their exploration expands beyond their own body to their immediate surroundings. In the second plane of development, something new happens. The second plane is a powerful time for developing a sense of place. Growth that happens so rapidly in the first plane as the child is moving from infant to 6 years old slows down in the second plane. Physical and psychological growth slow and calm. The body becomes more healthy. And the child in this age, they master movement. They master their ability to move through an environment from one place to another. At the same time as this, they develop a herd instinct. In the second plane, the child develops this instinct to always be a part of a group in everything that they do. That's the herd instinct. With that herd instinct and with these groups that they become a part of, ritual play becomes incredibly important. The sensorial explorer at this age becomes the imaginative explorer. No longer is it all about the senses, it's about the imagination. From 6 to 12, the imagination explodes. That's why in Montessori we have what's called cosmic education for this plane. Their imagination becomes so wide open and so powerful that they are just ready for the universe. And so essentially, they are introduced to the whole universe. But in terms of place, which is what we're talking about here, in the second plane, the spirit of play and place are bound up together in a unique fantasy world of secrecy, adventure, and challenge. That, according to author David Hutchinson, I like how he put that. That for the second plane child, place and play are bound up together. Their sense of place becomes about that ritualistic, imaginative play that they start to form with others around them. I remember being this age in life, and I remember constantly building forts, creating places, begging my family to help me build a treehouse. Couldn't quite get there, but I had a fort in the backyard. Was constantly constructing these special places and finding these hideouts, these secret places where my herd, my friends, and I could go for our ritualistic play, which was totally wrapped up in imagination, imagining a whole different world that we could be a part of when we were together. And so for the second plane child, that is what place is. It is that play, it is that imagination, but they're learning at this age that place is important, and they're already learning at this age that they can have a part in creating the importance